I have a confession to make. I have fallen deeply and madly in love with not one, but two very, very handsome men. I want to introduce them to you right now. Their names are Frog and Toad, and I could not imagine in my wildest dreams two more handsome men than these two, and I cannot wait to share everything about them today. I know I say it every single video how excited I am about each and every project, and I am genuinely always excited about the projects I'm making, but these two are something special. I am over the moon about Frog and Toad here. I hope that you are familiar with the children's books Frog and Toad. They are some of my family's absolute favorite stories of all times. I love the adventures that these two friends go on together. I just have such wonderful memories of reading these books to my kids. My own copies of these books are torn and tattered and stained and fingerprints and all of those things that loved books are. These two guys look like they just walked right out of the books. This is the brand new pattern Frog and Toad from the designer Christina McGowan from Frog and Cast. I don't remember the first time I actually saw this pattern, but I do remember when I decided I had to knit these two little guys for myself. I was scrolling on Instagram and these two little amphibians were looking right back at me, and I knew that I needed them in my life. I'm going to be sharing everything about this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful pattern. I really think you're going to like it, but I want you to get my resource guide. I'm going to leave a link for it in the description box below. It's going to have all of the links, all of the resources that I used to knit these two little guys, from the yarns to the needles to the tutorials that I needed, because I learned some new things and I can't wait to share all of that with you guys. But you will find a link to that resource in the description box below. The link will take you to the blog post, and as you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the box where it says put your email address here, and I will send the resource straight to your email address. That way you've got everything in one place. I love this pattern so very much. I'm going to probably say that a million times during this video, but I want to read to you the quote that Christina has on her website about this pattern and why she created it, why she designed it. I've always loved the saying that reading is dreaming with your eyes open. And as a child, no book filled my dreamscape more vividly than Arnold Lobel's Frog and Toad series. Tucked under our quilts, my parents would often read the books to my twin sister and me before bed, and the sense of comfort and home they provided was immense. I could not love the inspiration for these two little amphibians more than that. I just think that that is so wonderful. I think that this would make a wonderful gift for a young child if you got the book set and then knitted them the little characters. I just think it would be so beautiful. I want to talk about everything. I learned so many things from this pattern, so I don't want you to get super overwhelmed, because there are some new techniques that I learned and I was a little bit worried about it. It really wasn't that difficult, and I have all the resources for you so you will be able to make these for yourself. I bet you can probably guess, if you've ever visited my channel before, that I used Barocco Vintage for these little guys. So for their bodies, I used Barocco Vintage. It's a worsted weight, beautiful, beautiful yarn. I love this yarn. I'm going to have a link for it in the description box below, but if you also want to just get my free guide, you will find a link for it there as well. But I used the color Oats and the color Fennel. So this is just for their bodies. I love that these colors, they're really more than just flat colors. They are dimensional. You will find little flecks of yellow and whites and darker colors and lighter colors within these beautiful yarns. I think it's one of the reasons why Frog and Toad just looks so beautiful. Nothing looks ugly when you use this yarn. Now for the clothing, I did what I always do, and I paired the Barocco Vintage for the bodies with my favorite Debbie Bliss Baby Cashmerino for the clothing. And I just feel like that this worked really well, because one of the things that I love about this is that the Barocco Vintage has a slight little tiny halo. So it's just a tad bit fuzzy. And yes, I know frogs aren't fuzzy, but these guys are. They're just a tiny bit fuzzy. And then you juxtapose it with the beautiful smooth stitches of the Debbie Bliss Baby Cashmerino, and I love that look together. Now I wouldn't make them super fuzzy, just because that's not really realistic to frogs, although I think it could be really cute. But if you're curious about yarns, and I've compared a lot of yarns for hand knit toys, I actually also have a whole resource guide for that as well, and I will link that in the description box below. I'm going to have a ton of links this week for all of the resources. I got a lot. But just get your free guide so that you don't have to look through every single one of those little links. Now, onto the needles. This is a project that requires double point needles. I know that that can be a little bit intimidating, but once you get used to using double point needles, it really isn't that hard. It's not that different than just knitting flat. So I'm going to link my favorite tutorial for learning how to use double point needles. It's not my own video because mine would not be that good. I need a little bit more experience before I go showing double point needle tutorials here on YouTube, but it's one of my favorites. It's from the channel Sheep and Stitch. I think those are really well done, and it is super easy. It is explained very well. So don't get really worried about the double point needles. Just you gotta learn how to use them, and it just takes some fumbling and they feel super awkward in the beginning, but you get used to it after a while. My favorite brand that I have found for knitting toys is Chow. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I really hope that I am. And I love this set right here because it comes with a lot of the different sizes that you need, especially for knitting toys. There are 6 different sizes in this little set, and I really like that. I've used the 3mm double point, I can't say that word right now. I use the 3mm double point needles for their bodies. Now, I do have a confession to make. Here's what actually happened. I used the 3mm for Toad, and then I used the 2.75 for the clothing. Then when I went to knit Little Frog here, I just picked up the 2.75mm, and then I did his clothing in 2.5mm. So that may be very confusing, but basically just choose a needle size, and I think somewhere around that 2.75 to 3mm is going to work just fine. So Little Frog right here probably would have been a tad bit bigger, but not that much. And I think that they turned out adorable, even with that little mistake. Yes, they are absolutely adorable. I love them so much. So now I want to talk about the skill that I had to learn to be able to knit these little guys, and that was learning to knit short rows. I had heard about short rows before, I think especially with maybe sock knitting, I'm not exactly sure, but I was actually so intimidated by it that I almost abandoned this project, but then I thought, okay, I'm just gonna learn how to do it, and I'm so glad that I did not let my fear and my anxiety about learning a new skill stop me, because short rows really aren't that hard once you learn how to do it. My only issue was that I kept forgetting how to do it correctly on the knit side and the purl side, so I had to look at it every time I needed to do it. That took a little extra time, but I began to feel more and more comfortable with short rows. Now, if you're kind of wondering what in the world do you need short rows for, I'm going to show you. You really can't see it on their little bodies too much right here, but where you can see it, actually, I'm just going to take his little bathing suit off. So right here in his little knees, he actually has little legs that bend like a frog. These look just like real frog legs. So these little knees right here are where you need to learn how to knit short rows. It really is a wonderful skill to kind of have in your tool belt. And I'm going to leave links for the tutorials that I used. One is a written blog post from Pearl Soho. It's excellent. Sometimes I really like to read how to do a technique rather than just watch it. For learning how to make the short rows, that's what I used. Then to learn how to actually knit the wraps, I have a video on YouTube that I will link below because it was really good. It's a very short tutorial, which I like for things like this. So you'll find those in the description box below, as well as my little resource guide for Frog and Toad. Let's put your little clothes back on, Mr. Toad. You don't want to walk around naked. It's too cold for that. All right. There you go. You can go sit with your buddy now. The next thing that I want to share is that I stuffed these totally differently than I do all of my other knitted and crocheted toys. So I used these poly pellets. Let's go ahead and talk about this first. If you are knitting Frog and Toad for a small child, I do not recommend using these little poly pellets because they are 100% a choking hazard. So if you're making this for a child that's going to stick stuff in their mouth, don't use this. Just use regular polyfill. It is going to be safer. But what? If you're making this for yourself or an adult, or if you're making this for an older child who is not going to put it in their mouth, then I absolutely 100% would use these poly pellets. What it creates is like a beanbag texture to the toy. And I love that they're hefty. They have a weight to them and they're squishy, and you can feel that little beanbag texture in there. You know what else? It helps you to know if you have any holes in your knitting anywhere, and it will help you to be able to know exactly where those holes are, and you can seam them up, because if you have any holes in here, these poly pellets are going to come out. So make sure you've got really good tension with your knitting, because you don't want this stuff coming out because it gets everywhere. Now I'm going to show you exactly how I did it, because I've got a couple of tips for you as well. Okay, so I have my little unstuffed frog here, and my husband is actually gonna hold this for me because it kind of helps to do this with two hands. So come on over, honey. So he's gonna hold this, and what I'm doing, I'm not using my normal polyfill. I'm actually using, it's something called poly pellets, and they're the little beads. Now, I'm going to say that if you're making this for a small child, probably not a good idea, because I'm gonna show you what these look like. They're little, you may not even be able to see them, but they're little tiny itty bitty beads. It's like a beanbag beads, and these could be really dangerous for a small child. So keep that in mind if you're going to do this for a little kid. So the best thing that we have found, because this is my second one, is to get like a cookie sheet or something that you can put down, because these are gonna go everywhere. And then get a funnel, and then you have the opening at the top of the little froggy's head. So now you just add a little bit at a time, because it doesn't really like to kind of go in there, and you just kind of shake it around. Once I get this first batch of the pellets inside, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my little tool that I have, the little chopstick kind of a thing, and I'm going to stuff inside, because it's going to all be at the top. But once you start stuffing down in here, I'm going to stuff it down into the legs, because you've got to help this along. It's not going to naturally just go down into the legs. So to get some in that little calf area. And this is going to be a good time when you're going to discover whether or not you have any openings in your stitching here, and then you can kind of discover those and then stitch that up. Get those holes closed up really well. All right, I want that calf nicely shaped. Now I'll go ahead and go on the other side and start stuffing this down in that side. It looks like I'm torturing a poor frog, but he's okay. He doesn't mind. Right, frog? Oh boy. And now there's not much stuffing in the body yet. So I'm gonna go ahead and start adding, and then once I get a little bit higher, then I'll start adding some of the stuffing into the arm. So a little goes a long way. It's very easy to get too many pellets that you really can't deal with. See, they're going everywhere. So now I'm going to try to get some of this into, and I kind of hold it to the side to get into his little arms. And like with any toy, I don't stuff the arms a whole lot, just kind of using the tool to sort of scoop the little pellets into his arms. This is why the cookie sheet or something like a small tray or something like that is really nice to have here. Now we just have a little bit of the body left in the head, so we're gonna go ahead and add that. And I'm gonna add less. I'm gonna just do it a little bit at a time. And then you can kind of use your funnel to stuff it down in his head just a little bit. Okay, we need a little tiny bit more, because we don't want any gaps up in his head. And I would push it down a little bit. You want it nice in the body. But the good thing about this is that it's not going to deflate like polyfill. So you'll really be able to tell the shape right away. Yeah, just use the funnel spout here to just kind of push it in too. Here's the top of his little head here. That's as full as he's gonna get. Now I'm just going to start seaming up his little head. I'm gonna take my yarn all the way to the edge. Just makes it a whole lot easier to work with. And I am going to keep this over as I'm spilling it everywhere. All right, now I've moved my yarn all the way to the edge here, and I'm going to come on the outside of that stitch and on the outside of the adjacent stitch to close up the head. All right, so the stuffing is starting to kind of come out a little bit more. It really helps to just keep this little tool handy because once you actually stuff it, you will see it will go down. I found that when I was doing Toad, the first one, the seam really didn't look great. It's just the way it is. She has a different type of cast on that you can do so that you don't end up with this. And just to be completely honest, I was too lazy to learn that particular cast on. So I just did it like this. And I'm okay that he has a little ridge on the top of his head. It really doesn't bother me super bad because you really don't see it because their eyes are higher up. This does not bother me, but I'm also not really a perfectionist when it comes to these things. If it looks good enough, I'm happy. I recommend printing out the pattern twice. I didn't do that, and that's why I'm recommending doing it twice, because within the pattern it will just say this is for frog only, or it will say for frog and toad. And at times I got a little bit confused, and what actually happened was I made toad first, then I went to make frog, and I realized when I was knitting the legs that something's not right here, because frog is supposed to be a little bit bigger than toad, and mine was turning out the exact same size. And what I realized was that I was looking at the leg part of the pattern for toad only. I did not notice that for frog there were additional steps to take. If you do that, I would also recommend just highlighting one color for one toy. So if you are doing, say, frog, I would maybe highlight that in green, and for toad maybe yellow. And maybe if you want to highlight the section that's for both, maybe choose a different color like pink or orange. And that is what I'm going to do the next time, because it will keep things a little bit clearer and a little bit easier to find what steps to do. You don't have to do that, but I think it will make your life a little bit easier. Even if you only print it once, at least highlight it in different colors. Now, blocking is going to be absolutely essential for this project. You are going to need to block at least the clothing. And I really found that I needed to block their hands and feet because they are knit really just two-dimensionally. The little hands and feet kind of crinkled up a little bit, so I blocked them and it looked like I was torturing them, but I promise I wasn't. Okay, so this is going to look so horrible, but I promise no frogs or toads were hurt in this project. But because the hands are flat, they really do kind of curl up, so I'm going to block them, and I'm just going to put them right here on my blocking mat and make sure that I've got enough room to do his hands and his feet. This reminds me of high school biology when I had to dissect a frog, because we had little pans like this. Do you remember those? And the little pins where you had to pin the parts of the frog. But this guy, it's not bothering him. Then you can use this time to shape it. Actually, so if you see something that looks a little wonky, just shape it the way you want it. So I'm going to do it on this side as well. This hand has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fingers. This one has 4. I have no idea how I managed to get it like that, but you know what? That's okay to be different. And then I'm also going to do the feet, because the feet are kind of a little wonky, and I think they'll look a little bit better if I block them and get them exactly the way I want them to look. The only only other issue that I had with the pattern was when it came to making the eyes. The part that I struggled with was the white part of the eye. I could not knit that for whatever reason. It just was not working for me. So I just went back to my crocheting amigurumi skills and I just did 6 single crochet in a magic ring, and it worked perfectly in here. And then I embroidered the pupil part of the eye exactly how the pattern calls for. But I did have to crochet the little white part of the eye. It worked perfectly. It fit perfectly. I used the Barocco Vintage and a 3.5mm crochet hook to do that part. I really hope you enjoyed this pattern review of Frog and Toad. I absolutely love these two little guys. What the heck is that? Make sure to get your free Frog and Toad resource guide. You will find a link for that in the description box as well. As always, I am so happy that you decided to spend just a little bit of time with me today. I enjoy talking about knitting and crocheting toys so much, and I really do believe you guys are going to love this project. Don't let some of these new techniques stop you from doing this. What's the worst that can happen is you make an ugly toy, and that's going to be okay. And this pattern is such a wonderful way to grow your knitting toy skills and get those little tools in your tool belt. And if you like this video, please hit that like button, and if you would subscribe, that would be wonderful, and hit the bell notification so you will know when I publish a new video. As always, stay safe out there and happy stitching.